The office occupies the 14th floor of a building with no sign in the lobby directory. There is a name on the door, but it is not the family's name. It is a holding entity, 3 words long, registered in Delaware, designed to mean nothing to anyone walking past. 11 people work here. None of them are named on any public filing you could find if you tried. This is what 100 million in private wealth actually looks like once it stops being a number and becomes an institution with a floor plan. Most people picture a family office as a single advisor in a nice suit taking a call once a quarter. The reality is closer to a small, highly specific company that exists to manage one family's capital, tax exposure, legal structure, and succession, and nothing else. No outside clients, no public mandate. The entire operation answers to one bloodline, and every level inside it exists because a problem at the level below got too large or too specific to keep handling informally. Each level is a response to a failure the family experienced at the level before it, even when nobody calls it that. The number 100 million is not arbitrary as a starting point for this conversation. Below it, most families can still get by with a good accountant, a financial advisor, and an estate attorney they call twice a year. Above it, the complexity stops being something 1 or 2 professionals can hold in their heads, and the family either builds the infrastructure to manage that complexity deliberately, or the complexity manages them by default through missed deadlines, contradictory advice, and decisions made under pressure that a calmer process would have caught months earlier. Level 1. The single point of failure. Every family office starts the same way as one person. Usually a CPA the founder trusted at 8 million, kept on as the number grew, and never replaced because replacing them felt disloyal. By the time the family crosses 100 million, that one person is managing investment allocation, tax filings across 4 states, 2 trusts, a vacation property LC, and increasingly requests that have nothing to do with money, a college recommendation letter, a dispute with a contractor, whether the youngest grandchild's private school tuition counts as an educational distribution under the trust's terms. This person knows everything. That is the problem, not the achievement. At 100 million, a single point of failure is not a metaphor. It is a literal description of what happens to a family's financial infrastructure. If one person gets sick, retires, or simply makes one undocumented decision that nobody else can reconstruct. The first real architectural decision a family office makes is not about returns. It is about redundancy, building a structure that survives the departure of the person who built it. You learn this the expensive way usually. A family at this stage loses their longtime advisor to a sudden health event, nothing dramatic, just a man in his 60s who has a stroke on a Tuesday and cannot return to work. It takes the family 4 months and 310,000 in legal and forensic accounting fees to fully reconstruct what he had been managing from memory and a personal spreadsheet nobody else had access to. Nothing was stolen, nothing was mismanaged. It was simply never written down anywhere. 2 people could find it. The family does not blame him. They blame themselves for never asking the obvious question while everything still worked. What happens if you are not here tomorrow? Level 2, the committee. The fix is not a smarter individual. It is a structure that does not depend on any one person's memory. An investment committee forms usually 3 to 5 people, a mix of family members and outside professionals, meeting quarterly with an actual agenda and actual minutes. Decisions about capital allocation stop happening in hallway conversations and start happening in a room with a recorded vote. This sounds bureaucratic because it is, and that is the point. The committee exists specifically to slow down decisions large enough that speed is a liability. A real estate opportunity that requires a sandwich answer is, by definition, not the kind of opportunity a 100 million family office should be chasing, not because the deal is bad, but because urgency at this scale is usually someone else's problem being transferred to you at a discount. The investment policy statement gets written here, often for the first time. It is an actual document, not a philosophy, a constraint. It defines what percentage of the portfolio can sit in illiquid positions, what the family's actual risk tolerance is measured against, not how the patriarch feels about risk on a given Tuesday, and what triggers a mandatory review. Families who skip this step do not notice the absence until a market correction, when the absence of a written rule becomes three family members arguing about what they always meant to do, none of them agreeing, and the portfolio drifting through indecision while it loses value. There is a specific cost to skipping this level that families rarely discuss publicly. One family, 11 months after crossing 100 million, and still operating without a committee, takes a concentrated position in a private deal because the founder's college roommate brought it to him personally, and asking the roommate to wait for a formal process felt insulting. The deal fails within 14 months. The loss is 4.1 million, not enough to be catastrophic, but enough that the family finally writes the investment policy statement they had been postponing for 2 years. The document that would have prevented the loss gets written specifically because of the loss it failed to prevent. Level 3. The specialist layer. At 100 million, generalists stop being sufficient. The single CPA from level 1 cannot also be an expert in cross-border tax treaty implications, qualified opportunity zone structuring, and the specific estate tax exposure created by a family business with operations in 3 countries. The office begins hiring, or more often, retaining specialists, a tax attorney who works exclusively on the family structure, but is not a full-time employee. An estate planning attorney distinct from the tax attorney, because the 2 disciplines overlap less than people assume, and a single person trying to do both usually does both adequately, rather than either well. This is also where the family discovers what coordination actually costs. 3 specialists who do not talk to each other regularly will eventually give the family 3 pieces of correct advice that contradict each other in practice. The tax attorney recommends a structure that is sound for tax purposes and creates an estate planning problem. The estate attorney has to unwind 18 months later at a cost that exceeds what the original tax savings were worth. The fix is not better specialists. It is a standing requirement that all of them meet together, at minimum twice a year, in the same room, with the family present, so that recommendations get stress-tested against each other before they become structure. The insurance broker joins this rotation too, eventually, because the specialists keep recommending structures that change what needs to be covered and how. A property moved into a new entity changes the liability picture. A new operating business changes the key person exposure. Nobody connects these dots automatically. Someone has to be paid specifically to notice when one specialist's solution becomes another specialist's new problem. There is also a quieter cost at this level that has nothing to do with money. The family starts needing a translator. The tax attorney explains a structure in language built for other tax attorneys. The estate planning attorney does the same in a different vocabulary. By the time both explanations reach the family at the dinner table, neither one is fully understood, and decisions get made on trust in the messenger rather than comprehension of the actual mechanism. The families who handle this level will eventually designate one person, sometimes the original CPA, sometimes someone new, whose job is specifically translation, not expertise. Their value is not knowing more than the specialists. It is making sure the family actually understands what the specialists are telling them before they sign anything. Past this point, the office stops being a service. It becomes a small institution that happens to belong to one family. Subscribe before that level. I am not asking twice. Level 4. The governance layer. Somewhere past 100 million, a quieter and more difficult shift happens. The office stops being primarily about capital allocation and starts being about family governance. The rules for how decisions get made when the people making them disagree, which they eventually will, because money does not create disagreement. It just removes the financial constraints that used to make disagreement impractical. A family constitution gets drafted, usually badly the first time, and revised twice before it holds. It defines who can work in the family business and under what terms how distributions are decided when not every family member contributes equally, and how conflict gets resolved before it reaches a courtroom. Because litigation between family members destroys both the relationship and a meaningful percentage of the estate in legal fees, regardless of who wins. This is the level where the office's job quietly expands to include things no financial credential prepares anyone for. A family meeting that needs a neutral facilitator. Because two siblings have not spoken directly in 8 months over a disagreement about their mother's care. The office does not solve the relationship. It builds the structure inside which the family can solve it themselves. Or at minimum, disagree without the disagreement bleeding into every financial decision that follows. The governance documents also have to answer a question most families avoid until they cannot. What happens when a family member wants out, not of the family, but of the financial structure itself, a cousin who wants their share in cash and has no interest in the operating business or the long-term vision? Without a Beisel agreement negotiated calmly, in advance, this question gets answered during a dispute instead, with lawyers on both sides and a relationship that does not survive the negotiation regardless of how it resolves financially. Level 5. The risk architecture. By this point, the portfolio itself has stopped looking like a portfolio in the conventional sense. It is operating businesses, direct real estate, private equity commitments with capital calls on their own unpredictable schedule, and public market positions that exist mainly to provide the liquidity everything else lacks. The office's primary function shifts again from selecting good investments to managing the relationships between all of them, so that a single bad quarter in one area does not cascade into the rest. A liquidity waterfall gets modeled and stress tested. If a capital call, a tax payment, and an unplanned business expense all arrive in the same quarter, does the structure survive without forcing a sale at exactly the wrong moment? Most families never run this model until the first time they need it, which is also usually the worst possible time to discover the answer was no. Insurance becomes architecture rather than an afterthought key person coverage on the family members whose relationships the business actually depends on. An umbrella structure large enough to be almost embarrassing to explain at a dinner party, because the alternative is a single lawsuit reaching assets that took 3 generations to build. The office also begins running scenarios nobody enjoys discussing. What happens to the operating business if the founder dies without a named successor? What a contested estate's 18-month settlement period does to the family's actual cash position in the meantime. This is also the level where the family discovers that diversification and complexity are not the same thing, even though they look similar from the outside. 40 positions sound diversified, if 30 of them are illiquid private deals, depending on the same credit cycle. The family has built complexity without protection. The harder question is not how many different things do we own, it is how many of them actually fail for different reasons, at different times. A family that runs this analysis honestly often discovers their portfolio is far more correlated than anyone realized, and spends the next 18 months quietly unwinding positions that looked safe individually and were never safe together. Level 6. The institution. Past a certain threshold, and every family's threshold is different, but the patterns are consistent. The office stops being a service that supports the family and becomes something closer to a small institution the family happens to own. It has its own culture, its own institutional memory. Employees who have worked there longer than some family members have been alive, and a continuity that increasingly does not depend on any single family member's involvement at all. This is also where the office starts managing something most founders never anticipated needing managed: the family's relationship to its own reputation. a philanthropic arm gets formalized, not purely from generosity, but because an undirected family name attached to wealth. This size eventually attracts attention the family did not choose, and a structured foundation lets them choose the terms of that attention instead. The next generation gets seats on the foundation board before they get any access to the operating capital, a deliberate sequencing, governance before money. Because the families who skip this step discover, usually around the third generation, that they handed out capital before anyone learned what to do with it. The office also begins functioning as an unofficial archive. Photographs, family history, the story of how the original business started, the specific reasoning behind decisions made decades earlier. All of it lives somewhere now, deliberately preserved, because institutions that lose their own history tend to lose the values that built them within 2 generations of forgetting. This is also where the office starts running something it never planned to run, an education program for family members who have not yet inherited anything. Teenagers sit in on a simplified version of the quarterly review, not to vote, not to influence decisions, but to absorb the vocabulary and the rhythm of how the family actually thinks about capital before they ever have access to any of it. Families who skip this step tend to produce heirs who are financially sophisticated about everything except the specific structure they are about to inherit. Comfortable with markets in the abstract, completely unprepared for the particular machine their own family built. The office at level 6 exists in part to make sure that gap closes before it has to close under pressure. Level 7. The question nobody documents. There is a level above all of this that has nothing to do with structure, and every family office eventually runs into it. It is the question of what all this architecture is actually for. A trust document can specify exactly how money transfers. It cannot specify whether the people receiving it will understand what they are inheriting, or whether the family that built this will still recognize itself in the institution it has become. A founder sits in a quarterly review at year 19 of running this office, not the CPA from level 1 who retired comfortably and visits twice a year as an emeritus board member, but the founder's daughter, who now chairs the investment committee. Her father once ran a loan from a single spreadsheet. She listens to a presentation about a liquidity model, a tax structure, a governance amendment, and asks, mid-meeting, a question that is not on the agenda: does anyone in this room remember why we started doing this? Nobody answers immediately. The silence is not failure. It is the moment the family office stops being purely a machine and remembers it was built by people, for people, and the architecture only ever existed to protect something that was never the money itself, what the levels actually protect. Every level in this structure, the committee, the specialists, the governance documents, the liquidity models, exists to solve the same underlying problem. The single CPA was trying to solve a loan at 100 million. How do you build something that outlives the person who understood it best? The single point of failure at level 1 and the institutional culture at level 6 are not different problems. They are the same problem at different scales, answered with different tools. The office on the 14th floor, with no name in the lobby directory, will likely outlast every person currently working in it. That is not an accident. It is the entire point of building it this way, slowly, deliberately, with more redundancy than feels necessary at every stage. Because the families who skip a level do not find out what they skipped until the exact moment they needed it. There is one detail in all of this that applies whether you are managing 100 million or 10,000. Every level in this script exists because someone, at the level before it, refused to write down what they were doing. The CPA who could not be replaced, the investment decision made on a hallway conversation, the family meeting that never had minutes, the institution that forgot why it existed. At every scale of money, the same principle holds. What is not documented is not transferable, and what is not transferable does not survive the person who built it. You do not need a family office to apply this. You need a notebook. The next video goes inside the documents themselves. The investment policy statement that ran 14 pages and prevented a 280,000 loss in exactly the wrong week. The family constitution that took 3 drafts and a near fracture between siblings to finally land. The liquidity waterfall that saved one family the month a capital call arrived alongside a tax payment, alongside a structural repair, all in the same 90 days. The actual language, the specific mistakes. That conversation starts now.